buried up to her neck for being infertile. A widowed cowboy saved her and took her to his home. Maria had lived her whole life in a small, dusty village, surrounded by wide, empty plains. The kind of village where everyone knew everyone else, and no secret could ever stay hidden. Houses were made of rough wood, and dirt roads stretched between them, carrying the sound of children playing, dogs barking, and the whispers of neighbors who always seemed to know too much. For Maria, life had never been easy, but after losing her husband 5 years ago, it had become almost unbearable. She remembered the day clearly. Her husband, a kind and gentle man, had fallen ill and passed away within weeks. The village mourned him, but no one came to comfort her for long. Their eyes were full of pity at first, but soon that pity turned to suspicion. Maria did not have children, and in that village a woman's worth was measured by her ability to give life. People began to whisper behind her back. At first, she thought it was harmless gossip, but slowly it became something much darker. "Can she even keep a man happy?" someone would mutter when she walked past. "No children. What good is she?" Another woman would shake her head, frowning, pretending to fix her apron but staring at Maria all the same. The words cut deep, even if she tried to ignore them. Maria felt like she was shrinking inside herself, invisible, yet painfully exposed. She kept to her small house, avoided the market when possible, and tried to do her chores quietly. But nothing she did seemed to matter. The worst part was the isolation. Even neighbors she had once called friends began avoiding her. Invitations to gatherings stopped. Children no longer ran to her door to show her the new things they had learned. Her house, once filled with laughter and warmth, now echoed with silence. Each night, she would sit by the window staring at the horizon where the sun sank behind the hills, and wonder why life had been so cruel. She thought of her husband and what might have been if he were still alive. Sometimes, she cried quietly into her pillow, hoping no one could hear. Despite the sadness, Maria tried to hold herself together. She tended to her small garden, watered the few flowers she had, and kept the house clean. She even helped the elderly neighbor across the street, though she knew it would not earn her any praise. She wanted to show she was still a part of the village, still a human being, still worthy of respect. But no matter what she did, the whispers grew louder. Round. Children's laughter turned to mocking giggles when she walked past. Adults would shake their heads or cross the street to avoid her. The sense of being unwanted, unneeded, and unwanted pressed down on her chest like a heavy stone. Then came the day that would change everything. Maria had gone to the small market to buy bread, careful to keep her head down, hoping to avoid attention. The sun was high, beating down on the dusty streets, making the air shimmer and the earth smelled dry and strong. As she turned a corner, she noticed a few women from the village, women she had once called acquaintances, standing together and talking in low tones. She felt her stomach twist, but she tried to keep walking. "Maria!" one of them called, in a voice that sounded friendly but was far from it. She stopped, feeling uneasy. "Come here a moment," another said, beckoning her with a crooked finger. Something in the way they spoke made her pause. The smiles on their faces did not reach their eyes. They looked at her with something she could not quite name. Anger? Judgment? Cruelty? She felt a shiver run down her spine. Before she could respond, they grabbed her arms, and she realized too late what was happening. They were stronger than she had expected. They forced her to a secluded spot behind the market, away from the busy streets. Fear gripped her heart like icy fingers. She tried to pull away, tried to call for help, but no one came.
The village was quiet, as if holding its breath, and Maria felt utterly alone. "Why are you doing this?" she cried.
Her voice shook, and tears filled her eyes. I've done nothing wrong. You know exactly what you've done, one woman hissed. You're cursed, useless, no children, no husband. Bring shame. Maria's mind raced. She remembered the stories she had heard as a child about women who were punished for failing to fulfill the village's harsh expectations. She had never thought it could happen to her. Yet, here she was, trapped, trembling, and helpless. The women forced her into a shallow pit they had prepared earlier. Dirt was thrown over her legs, then her waist, until only her head remained above the ground. The earth was rough and scratchy against her skin, and she could feel small stones digging into her arms and shoulders. The sun beat down mercilessly, and dust filled her mouth when she breathed. She screamed, pounding on the dirt, begging them to stop. But the women only laughed, their voices cold and cruel. Maria's heart pounded in her chest. Panic took over. She had never felt fear like this before. Not when her husband died. Not when she was alone in the house at night. Not even when she faced the gossip of the village. This was real, immediate, and terrifying. She struggled, trying to free herself, but the earth was heavy and she was trapped. Her arms were pinned beneath the weight of the dirt. Every breath was hard. Her vision blurred with tears, and she felt like she might faint. Hours seemed to stretch into an eternity. Maria's mind wandered. She thought of her husband, of her lonely house, of the garden she loved. She wished she could disappear, wished the earth would open and swallow her so she wouldn't have to endure this humiliation. She prayed quietly, whispering words she hadn't spoken in years, asking for someone, anyone, to save her. Past. The heat of the sun and the weight of the dirt made her dizzy. She could feel her strength fading, and with it, the hope that someone would come. Then, as the shadows began to lengthen, she heard the faint sound of hooves on the dirt road. At first, she thought it was her imagination, but then the sound grew louder, steady, and strong. Panic and hope collided inside her. Could it be? "Someone coming!" she shouted with what little energy she had left. "Help, please!" Someone help me. Her voice was raw, hoarse from shouting, but she did not care. The hooves stopped nearby, and a deep, calm voice called out, "Hey! What's going on over there?" Maria's heart leapt. The voice was unfamiliar, but it was strong, steady, and kind. "Help me!" she cried again, her voice trembling. "Please, they're burying me!" Within moments, she saw a figure appear at the edge of the pit. A man, tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a dusty cowboy hat and a leather jacket, was running toward her. His eyes were focused, full of concern, and without hesitation he grabbed a shovel and began digging. Dirt flew in all directions as he worked quickly, carefully, yet with urgency. Maria felt a rush of relief and disbelief. Someone was saving her. Someone had come. She could only whisper, tears streaming down her face. "Thank you." "Thank you." Her voice was weak, but her heart was alive with a fragile hope. The man, without saying much, kept digging until she could finally pull herself free, collapsing into his arms, trembling, exhausted, but alive. Maria looked up at him, her face streaked with dirt and tears. The fear in her eyes slowly began to mix with gratitude and a flicker of trust. She didn't know who this man was or why he had stopped for her, but she felt, for the first time in a long while, that maybe life could still be kind. As the sun dipped lower in the sky, painting the village in golden light, Maria sat on the ground, her legs shaking, as the man helped her to her feet. She felt broken, humiliated, and terrified, but for the first time, she felt a tiny spark of hope. Hope that someone might see her worth, that someone might care. The villagers who had been watching from a distance quickly dispersed. Psst. Whispers still hung in the air, but they no longer mattered. Maria's world had shifted in an instant, and though she did not know it yet, this moment marked the beginning of a new chapter in her life, one that would take her far from cruelty and toward compassion, courage, and unexpected friendship. Maria's legs trembled as she struggled to stand, the memory of the dirt and the sun still heavy in her mind. The man who had saved her, Luke, as he finally introduced himself, offered a steady hand. His grip was firm but gentle, a strange contrast to the roughness of his weathered hands. Maria felt an unfamiliar warmth, something she had not felt in a long time. For years, people had looked at her with suspicion or pity, but this stranger's eyes were calm and honest.
"Are you hurt?" Luke asked, his voice quiet but commanding, making her feel both safe and understood.
Maria shook her head, though her body ached in places she hadn't realized were sore. Her arms and shoulders were stiff from being pinned beneath the dirt, and the sun had left her skin hot and burning. But she was alive, and for the first time in years she felt that survival was possible. Luke quickly glanced around, ensuring the women from the village had left the area. For rocks. Their cruel laughter had faded, replaced by the distant sounds of the village continuing its day, as if nothing had happened. Maria felt a pang of anger. She wanted to shout at them, to tell them how wrong they were, but all she could do was shake, her energy spent from fear and struggle. Luke noticed her silence, her trembling, and said softly, "We need to get you somewhere safe." "Can you walk?" Maria hesitated. She had never left the village without fear of being watched or judged. Now, even the thought of moving made her nervous, but Luke's calm presence gave her courage. She nodded slowly, gripping his arm for support. Together, they started down the dusty road, leaving the village behind. Maria's heart raced as they walked. Every sound, the wind through the dry grass, the distant bark of a dog, the creak of the wagon wheel seemed amplified. Yet, with Luke beside her, she felt a strange sense of protection she had not known before. As they traveled, Luke kept glancing at her, checking to see if she could keep up. "We're not far," he said. "I have a place where you can rest and clean up." Maria tried to imagine what kind of home could offer safety and comfort. She had long since given up on the idea of kindness in her village. But something about Luke's tone made her believe him. She allowed herself cautiously to hope. The journey was quiet for the most part. Luke didn't force her to talk, though he occasionally asked simple questions. Her name, how she was feeling, if she was injured. Maria answered hesitantly, still wary of trusting anyone. She had been alone for so long that even the thought of sharing her story felt dangerous.
Luke seemed to sense her hesitation.
Didn't press her, didn't push her to explain. Instead, he focused on guiding her carefully, keeping her safe on the uneven path that led away from the village and toward the open plains. After an hour of walking, the landscape began to change. The trees became taller and denser, their leaves casting cool shadows on the ground. A gentle stream ran alongside the path, and the sound of water was soothing, almost magical. Maria paused for a moment, staring at the clear, flowing water, and felt a small spark of wonder. It had been so long since she had seen beauty beyond the harshness of her village. For the first time in years, she felt a sense of peace, fragile though it was.
Luke noticed her pause. "It's a long way from your village," he said.
"Out here. No one will bother you. You'll be safe." Maria's throat tightened. Safety. What a strange, almost foreign word.
She had forgotten what it felt like to truly be safe.
But the sincerity in Luke's voice made her believe that maybe, just maybe, it could be real. Soon, the trail opened onto a wide clearing, and in the distance, a modest ranch came into view. Smoke curled gently from the chimney, and a few horses grazed quietly in the fields. The house itself was simple but sturdy, made of warm wood that glowed in the setting sun. Maria's heart skipped a beat. She had never imagined a place like this, calm, welcoming, and far from the judgment of her village. Luke led her up the small path to the house and opened the door. "Come in," he said. The interior was simple but clean. A few pieces of furniture, a small kitchen with copper pots hanging above the stove, and a soft rug near the fireplace. The air smelled faintly of herbs and wood smoke. Maria's eyes widened, taking it all in. She had never imagined a home could feel like this, not just shelter, but comfort, warmth, and care. Luke helped her to a chair near the fire. "Do you need to rest?" "I'll get you some water and clean clothes," he said. Maria nodded, too tired to speak. She sank into the chair, her mind still reeling from the events of the day. Her hands trembled as she touched her clothes, dirt still clinging to the fabric. She felt exposed in a way she hadn't felt even when buried in the dirt. But there was also a strange relief. Relief that someone had saved her, that someone cared. Luke returned with a basin of warm water, soap, and a clean dress. He gently helped her remove the dirtied clothes and wash away the grime of the day. The warm water soothed her aching muscles, and with each motion she felt a little lighter, as if the weight of the village's cruelty was slowly washing away.
She looked at Luke, unsure how to thank him. He simply smiled gently.
"It's okay. You're safe now," he said.
As Maria cleaned herself, she thought about the events that had led her here. The fear, the shame, the cruelty of the villagers. It was almost too much to bear. Yet, here she was, alive and in a place where she could finally breathe. Luke didn't ask questions about her past, didn't judge her. D'espèce. He offered her a simple kindness that felt revolutionary after years of isolation and suspicion. Once she was clean, Luke set a simple meal before her, bread, cheese, and fresh fruit. Maria hesitated, unsure if she should eat. It had been a long time since she had felt safe enough to eat in front of someone else. But hunger overcame hesitation, and she slowly began to eat, savoring each bite. Luke watched her without intrusion, giving her space while also offering quiet reassurance. Maria felt a flicker of gratitude and relief she hadn't felt in years. As night fell, the ranch grew quiet. The sounds of the village, the whispers, the cruel laughter, all seemed distant and unreal. Maria looked out the window at the stars twinkling above the plains and felt a sense of calm she hadn't known was possible. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to hope. Hope that life could be better, that kindness could exist, and that she could find her place in the world again. Luke showed her a small guest room with a soft bed. "You can sleep here tonight. Tomorrow we'll talk more," he said. Maria nodded, exhausted but comforted by the quiet assurance in his voice. She lay down, the soft blankets a stark contrast to the rough dirt she had been trapped in earlier. Her body was tired, her mind restless, but for the first time she felt the possibility of safety and a new beginning. That night, as she drifted into a light, dream-filled sleep, Maria thought about what had happened and what might come next. Desirao. She did not know the future, but for the first time in years she did not fear it completely. She had survived the unimaginable, and now she was in a place where she could start to heal. And somewhere deep inside, a tiny, fragile hope began to grow, a hope that life could be different, that she could find trust, and that perhaps happiness might be possible again. Maria woke the next morning to the soft light of the sun streaming through the window. For the first time in years, she felt something she hadn't known in a long time, a sense of calm. The night had been peaceful, and the warmth of the bed had chased away some of the lingering terror from the day before. Yet as she sat up and looked around the small, tidy room, her heart still beat quickly. Everything was so different from her life in the village. There were no whispers, no judgmental stares, no cruel laughter. Here she was, safe. And yet, part of her could not shake the feeling that this was all too good to be true. Luke had already started his morning chores when she stepped out of the room. He greeted her with a nod, his eyes calm and welcoming, as if nothing about yesterday had shaken him. Maria felt a wave of gratitude, but also a strange nervousness. How could someone be so steady, so kind, after all the cruelty she had faced? She wanted to trust him, but a lifetime of disappointment made her hesitant. "You should eat," Luke said, gesturing to the kitchen table where a simple breakfast was laid out. "You need strength for the day." Maria nodded and sat down, the warmth of the food comforting her. She found herself telling him small things about herself. Not much, but enough that she could feel the weight of silence lifting. "Eh." Luke listened without interruption, nodding gently, encouraging her with his quiet attention. She had not realized how lonely she had been until she felt someone truly listening.
After breakfast, Luke offered to show Maria around the ranch. She hesitated.
The thought of venturing out into the world, even here, was still frightening. But curiosity overcame fear. Bah. She followed him as he walked toward the open fields, pointing out the different areas of the ranch, the stables, the vegetable garden, the orchard, and the small barn where the animals slept. Each place felt alive and welcoming, a stark contrast to the cold judgment of her village. Luke explained the daily routines, teaching Maria simple tasks, feeding the animals, checking the fences, collecting fresh eggs. At first, she struggled. Her hands were small and unpracticed, and the chores required strength and skill she hadn't needed in years. But
Luke was patient. He showed her how to lift the baskets, how to move carefully around the animals, how to handle the tools without hurting herself.
each small success gave her a flicker of pride. She had forgotten what it felt like to be capable, to feel needed, to have a purpose. As the day went on, Maria began to notice small changes in herself. The fear that had clung to her like a shadow was slowly loosening. She felt the sun on her face without panic. She laughed quietly when a chicken ran past her feet. And she even spoke to the horses in a soft, gentle voice. Luke watched her with quiet approval, never pushing, never judging. He simply offered guidance and safety, allowing her to find her own rhythm. But the past was never far away. Even in this safe place, Maria could feel the memories of the village creeping in. The voices of the women who had buried her, the whispers of neighbors, the cold stares. They haunted her in quiet moments. Sometimes, when she was alone in the barn, she would touch the ground, remembering the dirt pressing down on her, and shiver. The fear was still there, lurking beneath the surface, reminding her of what she had endured. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, Maria sat by the small stream near the edge of the ranch. The water moved gently over the rocks, creating a soothing sound that seemed to calm her racing thoughts. She watched the reflection of the trees and the sky ripple on the surface, and for a moment she allowed herself to breathe fully. It was here, in this quiet, that she realized she was beginning to heal. Not completely, not yet, but enough to believe that life could be more than fear and suffering.
Luke found her there, carrying a bucket of water for the animals.
"Beautiful evening," he said simply, standing beside her. Maria nodded, unsure if she could put her feelings into words. She had learned to speak carefully, to hide her emotions, but here she felt a strange urge to open up. I never thought I could feel safe again," she admitted quietly. "After everything, I didn't think kindness existed." Luke nodded, understanding her words without judgment. "Kindness does exist," he said. "You just have to give it time to reach you." Maria considered his words. Time. Patience. Things she had never allowed herself. She had spent so long surviving that she had forgotten how to live. But now, she felt the first stirrings of hope that she could not only survive, but perhaps thrive. The turning point came unexpectedly. A few days later, while Maria was helping Luke repair a broken fence, a messenger from her village arrived at the ranch. He had come on horseback, carrying a letter that had been sent in haste. Maria's heart sank. She had hoped that by leaving the village behind, she could also leave its cruelty. The thought of facing those people again filled her with anxiety. Luke noticed her tension and placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "You don't have to deal with them if you're not ready," he said. Maria knew he was right, but curiosity gnawed at her. She unfolded the letter with trembling hands. It was from one of the village elders, a formal request for her to return and face the consequences of her absence. They wanted her to come back and explain herself, as if her life had been theirs to control. The old fear surged through her, but so did a new determination. She realized that she could no longer be defined by the cruelty of others. She had survived, and now she had the power to choose her own path. With Luke's encouragement, Maria made a decision. She would not let fear rule her. She would not return to the village, but she would confront her past in her own way, by reclaiming her life and her dignity. Desperation. She started to plan small steps, writing letters to those who had supported her, sending messages of thanks to those who had shown her kindness, and setting boundaries with those who had caused her pain. Best. Each action, though small, gave her a sense of control she had never known. In the days that followed, Maria's confidence grew. She continued to learn the rhythms of ranch life, gaining strength and skill with each passing day. Luke was always there to guide her, but he never imposed. He allowed her to make mistakes and celebrate successes on her own terms. Maria found joy in simple tasks, feeding the animals, collecting fresh eggs, tending the garden. She laughed freely for the first time in years, a sound that surprised even her. Through it all, Maria began to understand something crucial. Life was not about the approval of others. It was about finding strength within herself, embracing the small moments of happiness, and trusting that she deserved safety and care. She realized that she could heal, not by forgetting the past, but by learning from it and choosing a different path forward. By the end of the week, Maria felt transformed. She was still cautious, still carrying the scars of her past, but she was also stronger, braver, and more alive than she had been in years. The ranch had become more than a refuge. It was a place of possibility, a place where she could imagine a future that was hers to shape. And at the center of this change was Luke, a man who had saved her not just from physical harm, but from the despair that had threatened to consume her entirely. As the sun set over the ranch, casting long shadows across the fields, Maria stood beside Luke, looking out at the open land. For a second, she felt a sense of gratitude and determination, knowing that the journey ahead would not always be easy, but also knowing that she was no longer alone. For the first time, she felt ready to face life on her own terms, to embrace the unknown, and to discover the strength she had within herself all along. Life at the ranch had become a rhythm for Maria, one that she was slowly learning to trust. The days were filled with work, and the nights offered calm that she had not known in years. Each sunrise brought new tasks, feeding the animals, checking the fences, tending the garden, and helping Luke with the maintenance of the house and surrounding land. At first, every task felt like a challenge. Her hands were sore, her muscles ached, and she often worried about making mistakes. But with each passing day, she grew stronger, more confident, and more certain that she could survive, and even thrive, outside the judgmental eyes of her village. Luke continued to guide her patiently. He never criticized her mistakes, but instead offered gentle corrections, showing her how to handle tasks with care and precision. There was something comforting in his quiet steadiness, He never forced her to do more than she could handle, and yet he encouraged her to push herself just enough to grow. Maria had lived so long under the weight of fear that she had forgotten what it meant to be capable, to learn, and to feel proud of herself. The ranch was teaching her those lessons slowly, gently, and Maria began to embrace them.
But growth was never without struggle.
One afternoon, while mending a section of the fence near the edge of the property, Maria's hand slipped, cutting her palm on the sharp edge of the wood. Blood trickled down her skin, and she flinched, panic rising in her chest. For a moment, old fears from the village returned. The fear of being helpless, the fear of pain, and the fear of being alone. Luke noticed immediately.
Take a deep breath, he said, kneeling beside her. He cleaned the wound carefully, his hands steady and warm.
It's not as bad as it seems. You'll heal.
Maria watched him, feeling a strange mixture of gratitude and disbelief. No one had ever treated her injury with patience and care before.
In the village, mistakes were punished with shame and ridicule. Here, they were simply part of learning.
That realization began to shift something deep inside her. She realized that life could be a series of lessons, not a series of punishments. As the days went on, Maria began to take on more responsibility around the ranch. She learned to feed the animals efficiently, collect eggs without breaking them, and even tend to the small orchard, pruning the trees and watering the young saplings. Each accomplishment, no matter how small, built her confidence. She felt a sense of pride she had never experienced before. The fear that had once ruled her life began to shrink, replaced by a growing sense of self-reliance. Yet the past was never completely gone. Bad chases. Maria would often sit quietly in the evenings, staring out at the horizon, remembering the village, the dirt, the cruel whispers, and the women who had buried her up to her neck. Those memories would make her shiver, reminding her of the fragility of safety and the cruelty that humans could show.
But instead of letting these memories overwhelm her, she began to reflect on them differently.
She realized that she had survived the unthinkable, and that survival itself was proof of her strength. She had endured fear, pain, and humiliation, and yet she had not been broken. One afternoon, while walking through the orchard, Maria met a small group of children from a neighboring farm. They had wandered over, curious about the new woman living at the ranch, Passett. At first, Maria was hesitant, unsure if she could trust anyone outside the ranch. But the children were kind and playful, asking her questions about the animals and the plants. Slowly she began to answer, her voice soft at first, then stronger as she realized they meant no harm. For the first time in years, she laughed freely, a sound that surprised even her. It was light and clear, unburdened by shame or fear. Luke watched from a distance, a quiet smile on his face. He understood that these small interactions were part of Maria's healing, part of her reclaiming the life that had been stolen from her. He did not interfere or push her. Instead, he gave her the space to grow at her own pace. Maria began to feel that the ranch was not just a refuge, but a place where she could rebuild herself, where she could learn to trust, to hope, and to live without fear. There were also emotional challenges. Maria struggled with feelings of guilt and shame, even though she knew logically that the village's treatment of her was unjust. She often asked herself why she had been punished, why she had been singled out, and why life had been so cruel. These questions were heavy, but Luke's presence helped her navigate them. He encouraged her to speak, to express her feelings, and to understand that her worth was not defined by the cruelty of others. Over time, Maria began to see that she could forgive, not the people who had hurt her, but herself, for believing their lies and for allowing fear to dominate her life. One particularly difficult day, a storm swept across the plains. The wind howled, the rain poured, and the animals grew restless. Maria had to help secure the livestock and prevent damage to the fences. She felt overwhelmed by the force of nature and the responsibility placed on her. Yet, as she worked alongside Luke, she discovered something new: her own resilience. She could act decisively, care for the animals, and manage the work without fear taking over. The storm became a test, and she passed. By the time the rain subsided, she felt stronger and more capable than ever before. The months at the ranch were transformative. Maria discovered new skills, gained confidence in herself, and learned to trust her instincts. She also began to enjoy moments of peace, watching the sunrise over the fields, listening to the soft sounds of the animals, and tending to the garden she had grown from seed. These simple joys, once taken for granted or denied to her, became anchors of happiness and stability. She began to dream again, imagining a future where she could live freely without fear, judgment, or cruelty. Through all this growth, Luke remained a constant presence. He never forced Maria to move faster than she was ready, never demanded explanations, and never judged her past. His quiet support and steady guidance allowed her to discover strength she had forgotten she possessed. Slowly, Maria began to understand that life could be built on kindness, trust, and hard work rather than fear and punishment. She realized that she could choose her own path, define her own worth, and create a life that was meaningful and fulfilling. One evening, as the sun set and the ranch was bathed in golden light, Maria stood near the barn, looking out across the fields. She felt a profound sense of accomplishment. She had survived the cruelty of her village, endured humiliation and fear, and come out stronger. She had learned skills, built confidence, and discovered that she could live fully without the constant weight of judgment. Most importantly, she had begun to trust herself and others again. Maria knew that her journey was far from over. There would still be challenges, doubts, and fears to face, but she also knew that she had the tools to navigate them. She had learned resilience, patience, and self-worth. She had discovered that kindness could exist even after cruelty, and that life could offer beauty and hope even after tragedy. The ranch had become a place of healing, growth, and possibility. As night fell and the stars twinkled above the plains, Maria felt a deep sense of gratitude. She had survived, learned, and grown. The fear and shame that had once defined her life were no longer her masters. Instead, she was beginning to claim a new identity, one rooted in courage, resilience, and the quiet power of everyday life. And at the center of this transformation was not just the safety of the ranch, but the steadfast presence of Luke, who had shown her that even in a harsh world, there was room for kindness, trust, and love. Maria had come a long way since the day she had been buried up to her neck in the dirt. Those memories still haunted her sometimes, but they no longer held power over her. She had faced fear, cruelty, and isolation, and she had survived. More than that, she had grown stronger, learned new skills, and discovered that life could be kind, even after unimaginable pain. Her world had expanded beyond the boundaries of the village, and she now understood that the life she wanted was something she could build herself, brick by brick, day by day. The ranch had become more than a home. It was a place of freedom, safety, and possibility. Each morning Maria woke to the sound of birds singing, the wind rustling through the trees, and the soft neighing of the horses. She had learned the routines of the ranch thoroughly. Feeding the animals, checking fences, collecting eggs, and tending the orchard had all become second nature. She worked alongside Luke, not as a dependent, but as an equal, capable, and confident in her own abilities. Her muscles were strong, her hands steady, and her mind sharp. She no longer feared challenges. She faced them with courage and calm determination. Even beyond the physical work, Maria had grown emotionally. She had faced the shame and cruelty of her village in her own way, by refusing to let it define her. She had begun to trust people again, first slowly with Luke, then with neighbors who occasionally visited the ranch, and finally with the children from the nearby farm who had once been shy around her.
Her laughter returned naturally, no longer forced or nervous, but light and joyful. She had learned to enjoy the simple pleasures in life, watering the garden, watching a calf take its first steps, feeling the warmth of the sun on her skin.
Each day brought small victories, and each victory reinforced her sense of self-worth. Luke had remained a steady presence throughout her transformation. He never pushed her to go faster, never judged her for her past, and never demanded more than she could give. But he offered guidance, reassurance, and a quiet strength that Maria had come to rely on. Over time, she realized that her feelings for him had grown beyond gratitude. She admired his kindness, his patience, and the way he treated every living thing with respect. She felt safe and understood in a way she had never known, and slowly her heart began to open to the possibility of love again. Not the controlling, possessive kind she had feared, but a gentle, mutual partnership built on trust. One afternoon, as they worked together in the orchard, Maria felt a sense of calm determination she had never known in her life. The village was far behind her, its whispers and cruel judgments powerless to reach her here. She thought about the women who had buried her, the elders who had judged her, and the friends who had turned away. Instead of anger or bitterness, she felt pity for them. They had been trapped by their own fear and ignorance. She, however, was free. And that freedom was something she intended to cherish and protect. Maria began to take on more responsibilities around the ranch, not just for survival, but to shape her life in meaningful ways. She planted a larger garden, expanded the orchard, and even began raising a few animals of her own choosing. Each new task was a challenge, but also a triumph. She discovered a joy in creation, in nurturing life and tending to the world around her. She realized that life was not just about surviving cruelty, it was about building something lasting, something beautiful, something that reflected her strength and care. Luke noticed her transformation and admired it quietly. He never told her what to do, but he recognized that Maria had grown into a woman who could stand on her own, capable and confident.
Their relationship deepened naturally, based on mutual respect, trust, and shared work. Maria learned that love did not have to come with pain or judgment. It could be quiet, steady, and full of support.
She found comfort in his presence, joy in his laughter, and strength in his unwavering steadiness. The months turned into years, and Maria's life at the ranch blossomed. She became a vital part of the community, helping neighbors with tasks, sharing her knowledge, and offering kindness without expectation. Children adored her, running to her side to learn about animals, plants, and the natural world. Adults respected her for her hard work, resilience, and wisdom. She had built a life that was completely her own, free from the shadows of her past. Yet, Maria never forgot the lessons she had learned from her suffering. She carried them with her as reminders of her strength and resilience. The fear that had once dominated her life had been replaced by courage, and the shame had been replaced by self-respect. She knew that life would continue to present challenges, but she also knew that she had the tools, the experience, and the inner strength to face them. Every scar, every hardship, every tear had become part of her story. Proof that she could endure and grow stronger. One evening, as the sun set in brilliant shades of orange and pink over the plains, Maria and Luke sat together on the porch of the ranch house, watching the animals settle for the night. The air was cool and quiet, filled only with the gentle sounds of nature. Maria leaned back, feeling a sense of peace she had never known in her village. She reflected on the journey that had brought her here, the cruelty, the fear, the rescue, and the gradual, patient growth. Each step had been difficult, but every step had led her to this moment of quiet fulfillment. "I never thought I could feel this way again," Maria said softly, her voice filled with wonder. "I never thought life could be calm, or kind, or beautiful." Luke smiled, understanding the depth of her words without needing to reply. His presence alone was affirmation that life could be different. that kindness could exist, and that she could reclaim her life fully. Maria realized that her story was no longer defined by the cruelty of others. It was defined by her courage, her resilience, and her willingness to embrace life despite fear. She had reclaimed her dignity, rebuilt her confidence, and created a future filled with possibility. She had learned to trust, to love, and to nurture not just the land and animals around her, but herself.
As the stars appeared in the night sky, Maria felt a deep sense of gratitude.
She had survived the unthinkable, grown stronger, and discovered a life that was rich with hope, joy, and purpose. The ranch was no longer just a place of refuge. It was a home, a sanctuary, and a foundation for everything she hoped to become. She had learned that even after pain and suffering, life could offer beauty, love, and fulfillment. Maria and Luke worked together to make the ranch thrive, and together they built a life rooted in respect, kindness, and partnership. Though Maria had never been able to have children, she had built a family of her own in spirit, a family of animals, neighbors, friends, and a companion who valued and supported her. She realized that family was not only defined by blood, but by love, care, and shared purpose. In the quiet moments, Maria often reflected on her journey. She remembered the day she had been buried, the despair she had felt, and the hopelessness that had seemed endless. She remembered Luke's hands pulling her free, his steady voice, and the warmth that had begun to replace fear. And she realized that life was not about what others thought of her. It was about how she chose to live, how she nurtured herself, and how she embraced the opportunities before her. Maria's story became one of courage, hope, and transformation. She had survived cruelty, reclaimed her life, and discovered that the power to shape her destiny was always within her reach. She had built a life that was full of purpose, beauty, and love, proof that even in the darkest moments, hope could flourish. And as the ranch settled into the quiet of the night, Maria felt a sense of completion. She had faced the impossible, endured suffering, and emerged stronger, wiser, and filled with gratitude. Life was no longer something to fear, but something to embrace. She had survived, healed, and built a future that was entirely her own. One full of possibility, joy, and the gentle power of resilience.